It's my very great privilege to be able to introduce your next speaker to you. Deborah Glass is the Victorian Ombudsman. She's been appointed in 2014. It's a 10-year statutory appointment. The role of the Victorian Ombudsman is a critical one about keeping government honest, ensuring transparency, allowing you to be certain that the way government interacts with you and your families is open and fair and according to law. Deborah has an extraordinary CV, a very interesting history, having worked in Hong Kong and in London, doing a range of regulatory roles, but most recently in London, having been at the Police Complaints Commission of England and Wales. We're very lucky to have her speak with us this morning, and I'd invite you to welcome her. Thank you very much.
Morning, thank you very much. I'm just going to hear me there. Let me just first start by acknowledging that here we are on Little Bourke Street, we are on Aboriginal land. I just want to acknowledge and remind ourselves that this piece of Little Bourke Street, and indeed every square centimetre of Australia, is and always will be Aboriginal land. So I'm the Ombudsman. Now I was just going to ask you what I do, but Shirley's just told you. So I'm going to ask a few other questions. So without Googling on your phone here, please, where does the word come from? Anybody tell me what Ombudsman, is it an English word? You've been Googling, haven't you? There's always somebody in the back who's Googling the word Ombudsman. But okay, you can tell me, where's it from? Swedish, yes. And what is it, now that you're doing such a great job here, what does it actually mean, Ombudsman? No more Googling? Anybody, any other, louder, one person at a time. No, can't hear that. Okay, is anybody, I hear somebody over here, yes? What does it mean, the word Ombudsman? Yep, very good. Okay, look, I'm going to, it actually comes, the Swedish word, thank you very much, from back there. It actually comes from an old Swede. Anybody here from Sweden? Any Swedes in the room? Ah, fantastic. You can correct my pronunciation in that case. Riksdagsjustitiea Ombudsman. Parliamentary agent for justice, or to put it more colloquially, Ombudsman means defender of the people. Okay? Who's my boss? Anybody come up? Anybody guess who the Ombudsman's boss might be? Go on. No, it's not the Chief Justices. I'm happy to say. Not that I don't respect them immensely, of course. Any other guesses? It's the Parliament. Parliament and the people are my bosses. You all are in your own way, actually. We're not quite, those of you who are over 18, and those who vote. Do you know you get rid of an ombudsman if they don't like me? Because of course, you know, as you've heard, I mean, ombudsmen resolve disputes, investigate government, keep governments honest. What do you do if you don't like the ombudsman? What do you do? What does the government do if they don't like? Can they just fire me? Well, the answer to that, I'm happy to say, is no, they can't just fire me. It has to be a joint resolution of both Houses of Parliament to get rid of the Ombudsman. And I gather you're going to Parliament this afternoon, so you might just ask a question or two about that. How could you get a joint resolution of both Houses of Parliament? So I've got the powers of a Royal Commission. I've got lots of very nice powers, but I want to tell you a little bit about what I do, and I'm just going to play. I used to spend a few minutes to talk about what I do. Then we made a little video. This is going to go for a whole 2 minutes. This is a test of whether the sound is working. But this is just a little video to tell you what I do.
Welcome to the Victorian Ombudsman. We deal with complaints about more than 1,000 state and local government agencies, from councils and prisons to statutory bodies like VicRoads and WorkSafe. Our role is to make sure their decision-making is fair. In weighing that up, we look at the circumstances surrounding a complaint, including what the law is and the agency's policies and procedures. If you think you've been treated unfairly, the first step is to try and resolve your problem with the agency. If that doesn't work, you can contact us. You don't have to be over 18, and you can remain anonymous. In some cases, another person can complain for you. You can complain to us about something an agency did or didn't do, or a decision it made. For example, if you made a complaint but the agency is taking months to respond, or the agency says they've fixed the problem but you're still not satisfied, or they've made a decision that you think is unfair. You can also come to us if you feel an agency has infringed your human rights. We understand you may be feeling frustrated by the time you speak to us. Try to explain your complaint in a few key points, including what happened and when. Tell us what you'd like to happen, and remember to send us relevant documents. We'll assess your complaint and decide on a course of action. If we think we can help, we'll try to resolve the matter informally, and in some cases, we investigate further. When we've finished, we might make recommendations to the agency on how it can improve. In some cases, we'll present our findings to Parliament, so the public knows what we've said, and the lessons can be learnt by the whole state government. By helping government agencies to improve, we create a better experience for everyone. We don't deal with complaints about the police, courts, politicians, or employment issues. There are some other limits on what we can do too. For example, if your complaint is very old, or there is another body that can deal with it. If you're not sure what to do next, get in touch, and we'll try to point you in the right direction. You can find out more about where we can and can't help on our website. Otherwise, you can email, call, write to us, or make a time to come in and see us. Head to ombudsman.vic.gov.au for more details. The Victorian Ombudsman. Free, fair, independent.
All clear now then? So, the Ombudsman exists because life isn't always fair, right? And there are things that, I don't deal with every unfairness in the world, of course. There are thousands of things, where you say this is not fair, but there are over 1,000 bodies within government that make decisions about lives. Your life, your family's lives, your friends' lives, your friends' families' lives. And these are the things that people get riled about and they say, what can I do about it? It's not fair. Because, governments are really big machines. And one of the origin of the Ombudsman, and going back to what I consider more about Sweden, is because there fundamentally is an imbalance of power between the individual, every one of you, your parents, your families, your colleagues, and the state. And they're making big decisions every day that affect your lives. And sometimes those decisions involve things that you say, well, that's not right, that's not fair, what can I do about that? Well, under the circumstances that we've described, you can go to the Ombudsman. So what I want to do is give you a few examples about kind of things you can go, the Ombudsman does. Now, do any of you know that there's a Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities in Victoria? You heard from Rob Hulls this morning, didn't you? Yeah. Did he tell you that he actually was the architect of the Charter of Human Rights? Did he mention that? Well, good, because that's a very great thing that Victoria has. And what that charter does is require government agencies to act compatibly with human rights and promote a culture where everybody's rights are respected. And it's important, we hear about human rights abuses in places like Syria, but actually they also happen in Victoria. So I want to give you an example, give you an idea about protecting young people's rights in a practical sense. So I'm going to play another video to you, and I'd like you just to watch this. This is Flinders Street Railway Station. This is a bit of CCTV. Now what you can see here, can everybody see this all right? You've seen, in this case, there were two teenage girls who were trying to not get a ticket, and they've been stopped by some authorised officers. See that? Do we think that was excessive force used by ticket inspectors? Well, we investigated that case a few years ago, actually. And here, in fact, what we concluded, and that was a report that I tabled in Parliament about it, and what I concluded in that case is that the human rights of that 15-year-old were breached at Flinders Street Station, because she wasn't just, wasn't a success before, she was actually held down for about 8 minutes, until the police arrived in full view of, this stream of commuters passing through Flinders Street Station, and for a $2.50 fare, in fact $2.48 to be precise, was the so there was an issue about proportionality. Was it right? Was there something else? Of course, we should not be fare evading, and I'm sure none of you would dream of doing any such thing. But there is an issue of proportionality. So if somebody has slipped through the gates, they should be stopped. But should they be spear tackled by a grown man so they land on their head? I don't think so. So that's what I concluded. I concluded that the fare used was excessive, and I concluded that it was degrading treatment and a breach of the Charter. Another example I'd like to share with you, so that's one of the cases I'm involved with. This is a slightly different case that involves a much older person than any of you, indeed even older than me. This actually was a complaint by a 91-year-old man named Alan Lorraine, here's Alan Lorraine, who was a resident in an aged care home in Melbourne. And what happened in this aged care home is that this place he was living with his wife, who had dementia, went bankrupt. And when it went bankrupt, it took with it the bonds that the old people and their families had paid, of about $4.5 million. So they lost all that money. And Alan Lorraine thought he should complain. Something's gone wrong, he thought, for this place to have gone bankrupt like that. So I met him a number of times. He wasn't on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. I don't even think he had a computer. So he typed these old-fashioned letters. He had an old-fashioned typewriter, and he typed these old-fashioned letters. Anybody ever seen a typewriter? Oh, good. Well, they do exist still, and it's possible actually to type and send letters and print them off and put them in the mail, and that's what he did to everybody all around. He sent them off to department secretaries and ministers. Something's gone wrong. And they'd lost everything, and he just got the classic stonewalling bureaucracy. Not our problem. It wasn't a government facility. Not our problem. So. But the impact of this, you have to reflect on this. These old people hadn't just lost all their money, they'd lost their dignity, they'd lost their independence. Think about your grandparents, indeed your great-grandparents. What would happen to them if the money that they had put up to secure their care in their old age was suddenly all gone? They'd sold their family homes to pay for this. So he finally complained to my office, and we investigated it, and when I tabled the report in Parliament, I described it as a litany of failings. So, but actually, what's the outcome here? What's the fair outcome for a group of very elderly people who have lost everything? Well, what I thought it should be was what's called an ex gratia payment. Can anybody tell me what ex gratia is? A bit of Latin for you. Ex gratia. It means act of grace. It means it's not compensation, because it's not something that you're legally entitled to, but it is something that, as a matter of grace, as a matter of fairness, I felt the government should pay. So my recommendation, when I tabled that report, was that the government make an ex gratia payment to these people who had lost so much money. And I formally recommended that they make that payment by the end of June. So I provided that report to the responsible minister, and I told the families that as the Ombudsman, I can't enforce my recommendations. And I think that's right, because the kind of recommendations I make could involve millions of dollars and indeed government policy, and I'm not responsible for the state budget, and I'm not responsible for government policy. I can recommend, but I can also monitor, and I table my reports in Parliament. So I said to the minister, I'm not going to, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm recommending that you make these payments, And whatever you decide, which is entirely a matter for you, Minister, I will make that response public. So do what you like, but I will make it public. And what do you think happened? Well, I'm happy to report that the government paid out $4.33 million to all those people. Everybody entitled to it got paid. The persuasive powers of the Ombudsman strike again, and Alan Loren got an Order of Australia Medal for his efforts, which I thought was lovely. Yeah. Good on you, Alan. Thank you for that. I'll tell him. Pass that on, Amanda. I just want to give you one more recent case that actually was a report I tabled last month. Who's familiar with parking fines? Now, I'm assuming that many of you don't actually drive yet, but probably a few of you do. But I'm guessing that even so, you're familiar with the parking fine problem, right? Yep. Anybody not familiar with parking fines? No. Okay. Parking fines are something that we get complaints about all the time. Now, we do not deal with every complaint about parking fines. We couldn't do that because then I did a lot more than the 90 people I have in my office at the moment. And as you heard in that video, if somebody has a right of appeal to a court or tribunal, normally I don't deal with it. And normally with a parking fine, you don't like it, you've got a right of appeal to a court. So that's where you're expected to go, because there are tens of thousands of them every year. But I do have a provision in my Act that allows me to take up a complaint, including about a parking fine, if not to do so would cause an injustice. So I actually have a discretion to deal with cases involving parking fines. And that's actually what we did one day. So I'm actually, rather than tell you about it, I'm just going to play you a very short clip that explains what we did. So what we found, so just a bit of a preamble, we looked into a series of cases about disability parking permits. And this is in, anybody here live in Maribyrnong? Nobody here from Maribyrnong City Council? Okay, well this involved Maribyrnong City Council, and the complaint was from the local legal centre about how people who had disability parking permits were being fined, even though they actually had the permit. So they made a mistake. Every one of them made some sort of mistake with their permit. You know, they were stressed, they were upset, you know, they put the expired permit, or they put it facing the wrong way, or it fell off the dashboard or something. And they got a fine, fair enough. Then they went to the council and said, look, you know, I've actually got a correct permit, here it is. And normally, for a first offence, that they would overturn the fine, and that would be the end of it, right? Well, that's not what Maribyrnong was doing. They were saying, too bad, you've got a fine. And we're talking about $150, these fines, and for the people we're talking, this is a lot of money. You know, these are people who were going without food and medicine because they couldn't pay the fine. So this is what happened.
A Western Suburbs Council has been slammed for its lack of compassion after standing firm on fines for people already going through trying times. Among them, an elderly man who was caring for his dying wife.
When Vic Patulik's wife was diagnosed with cancer, he cared for her right until the end. But his difficult circumstances didn't matter to Maribyrnong Council, which still fined him for forgetting to display his disability permit.
My wife, she had lung cancer. She didn't sleep enough. I worry what's going to be happened.
When the 80-year-old asked council to withdraw the fine, it refused.
They are just looking for money.
His experience forming part of a report from the Victorian Ombudsman, which criticised the council for upholding fines, even when drivers could prove they had a disability permit.
In those circumstances, you would expect the council to have some heart.
The Ombudsman didn't only rely on stories like Vic's to come to her decision. When the numbers were crunched, Maribyrnong Council came out on top as the least likely council to withdraw a parking fine after review. The council has agreed to implement 2 of the Ombudsman's recommendations, including to update the guidelines about internal reviews and training staff to exercise discretion, but at this stage, they won't be giving any refunds. The CEO says all matters have already been finalised and that the council will need to seek further legal advice.
There is no reason why they can't make an ex gratia payment should they wish to do so.
Estelle Griefing, 7 News.
There you go. Well, they paid out one of the 5 cases, and I'm still waiting for an outcome on the other 4. But as you have, persuasive powers of the Ombudsman's office. So, is anybody thinking being an ombudsman sounds like fun? How do I become one? No? Yes? Possibly? A few people? Yeah, okay. Well, look, this is the bit where I tell you a bit about my career journey, because I started with a law degree. I did well. You know, you got to do pretty well at school to get into law. I think that was true even in my day, you know, generations ago, and I think it's still true today. So yes, you know, getting into law is, you know, can be a bit of a challenge. But I have to tell you, and this is a little secret I want to share, I was a pretty average student. I was too busy having a good time at university, and yeah, I decided actually very quickly that I didn't want to be a lawyer. This is just, you know, this is a bit of ancient history for you. That's what Melbourne was like in the 1980s. That's what the trams looked like back in the 80s. And that was, you know, William Street in the 80s. And that, you know, actually has not changed at all. It still looks exactly like that. And you still see chaps exactly like that, do you not, when you walk up William Street? Probably slightly fewer weeks than in the old days, but still, you know, you still see a fair few. So some things don't change, although I don't actually miss the old green rattlers. So, I started doing law. I realised on my first day I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I stuck it out long enough to earn just enough money to get out. So I did what millions of young people do. I left. And I ended up in Switzerland, where I, yeah, that actually is me. I fell into investment banking. Now, this is not something I had any intention of doing. I actually wanted to be a writer. So there I was. I worked for a few years as a lawyer. I thought, don't like this. I'm bored. I'm out of here. One-way ticket, off to Europe. Wanting to be a writer. I realised that that wasn't even going to pay for repairs to my rucksack. So I took a job, and I took a job with, as it turned out, Citicorp Investment Bank. That didn't, and I realised actually very quickly, I mean, it was actually a very exciting time in a way, but I thought, I don't really want to be a banker. I'm not motivated by money. One of the things we learn in life is what drives us, and we're all driven by different things, different instincts, aren't we? And I realised money isn't a driver for me. So what I'd been doing when I was working for the bank is that I'd got familiar with regulation. Anybody heard of regulators? Familiar with what regulators do? They kind of, you know, they're government agencies that sort of keep you honest. And so my next move actually was to Hong Kong. I'd been working in Hong Kong for a time, and for the bank, and I thought I really want to do more of this. And just at the time, Hong Kong was setting up a new government agency to keep the markets honest, the stock market. So I had experience of financial matters, and I wanted to work in the public interest. So I took a job for what was called the Securities and Futures Commission of Hong Kong as it was being set up. And it was really about standards of behaviour, you know, setting standards of good conduct and enforcing those standards of good conduct, which I did for about 10 years, and it was a great life. But again, you know, what next? For me, life has actually been, I never planned this career that I'm describing to you. I'm actually, it was a series of, you know, what happens next? What are the opportunities? What do I not want to do? And I went to the UK for what really amounted to personal reasons, where I took on the role of chief executive of something called the Investment Management Regulatory Organisation. And I put these out really to illustrate that it's very much a man's world. And it was being the only woman in the room, the only woman around the boardroom table. But can you actually see that cartoon? It is a for those who can't read it at the back, it's a classic New Yorker cartoon, and it says, "That's an excellent suggestion, Miss Triggs. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it." Yes, well, there you go. Anyway, look, this is, it's, I hope, a different period now, but it's still, in some parts, a man's world. And, yeah, it was an interesting time to be working financial services. But that role came to an end, and as it was coming to an end, I saw an advertisement for something called the Police Complaints Authority, which was an independent agency dealing with and it turned out all this kind of thing. It became the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Do any of these scandals sound familiar to anybody here? I mean, they all happened some time ago, and probably when you were Hillsborough, phone hacking, the shooting of John in the Stockwell Underground by the police in an innocent Brazilian. There were lots of. It was basically dealing with death and destruction on a pretty much daily basis, and I could give you endless war stories about some of the things that that I was dealing with in that job. But basically, my role was to do major investigations into deaths following police contact and major corruption scandals that didn't necessarily involve death, but were pretty grim and gruesome. So that was my life for really about 10 years. Anyway, it came to an end, as these things do. And it was time for me, I felt, to come back to Australia. So sometimes it's just necessary. And there's a lovely quote. I don't know whether we have any poets in the room, or anybody who heard of a poet called T.S. Eliot. Well, I'm going to read you a line of T.S. Eliot because I think everybody needs to know this line. I think it is wonderful. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. You're at the beginning of your journeys, and actually that is a poem about a journey. And for me, it was a journey, and it was a journey that brought me back to where I started. Bearing in mind, I left Australia on a one-way ticket as a junior lawyer, never wanting to be a lawyer, and I came back as the Ombudsman, doing what I think is the best job in the state. So here I am, and it's entirely a coincidence that my predecessors are all in black and white. But yes, I am the first woman to do the job, and kind of a bit surprising really that it took that long, right? Thank you. Why did it take the state 43 years to find a woman to do the job, eh? Anyway, there we are. At least they got around to it. And I think I do the best job in the state, actually. Making decisions in the interest of justice. And being a constitutionally entrenched, independent officer of Parliament. So, where the opportunity really to make a difference is incalculable. So I just put that up as a bit of a joke. I don't know that those are the shoes they were actually wearing, but it is nice. I think I'm the first person to do the job in heels. I can't be absolutely certain about that, of course, because I haven't inquired too closely. But there you go. That's a bit of a flavour of what we do, a bit of a flavour of my journey. But who are the people? So what's the Ombudsman's office like? I want to broaden this out now. And I actually have a posse of my staff here. So I want to invite Thomas and Patrick and Amanda to come up and answer all your difficult questions. So it's look, I don't know whether you look. I'll just end on my last slide actually, and then we'll open this up. So we've got here we are. Let's just even have a resident dog from time to time. And that's our lovely officers. And I have about 90 staff, and here are 3 of them. And I brought them along because I thought, if you've got questions about, the Ombudsman's office and what we do and what the staff do, I think it's probably better to hear them from them directly rather than from me. But from my part, I want to just put up this quote for you because I love this quote, and it comes from an Irish statesman called Edmund Burke in 1775, which is pretty amazing. It is not what a lawyer tells me I may do, but what humanity, reason, and justice tell me I ought to do. We are in the business of justice. We are not so much in the business of the law, even though this is Law Week, and even though many of us, in fact, are lawyers. Amanda and Thomas have just graduated from law. Patrick is studying psychology. But we're all in the business of justice. And that's where I think everybody wants to be. It's the guiding principle of ombudsman work, actually, the world over. And I commend it to every one of you. So let me stop at that point and invite you to ask your questions. If not, I'm just going to invite my staff just to talk. So
You've got three nice young.
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you, Thomas? Why don't you just give it to the answer? Yeah, what do you do
Yep.
exactly?
Oh, this works? Yep, no, it does.
Talk a little bit about their background.
Yep.
And how they met.
Yep. Similarly to Deborah, I like her went overseas. I didn't do law as an undergrad, so there's always that. So I know even though you're looking to graduate soon, you don't necessarily need to go straight into it. You can do it as a postgraduate degree if you decide later in life that that's actually what you want to do. So I did an arts degree, journalist. First, then went and did law afterwards, and that's how I kind of got into this area. But I also decided that I didn't really want to do the day-to-day corporate law work. So that's why I joined the office. Patrick and I were both in the early resolution team, and I'll let Patrick talk soon about his year. But what we're really doing is we're really at the front end. So if you call in and do make a complaint, you'll probably be speaking to myself or Patrick. There's actually not that many more people in it, so you probably might be one of us.
And the number is,
Yeah, we're getting more. But we come in, we talk to people, talk about your issue. As you see, we do deal with a range of things, but there are things that we can't necessarily deal with. If it is, we'll give you some advice about what steps you can take about it. But we're really looking at that stage to try and say, look, can this be resolved in a few phone calls? Can we call the organisation? Can we clarify things? It looks a bit bad. Will they be able to change their tack on it? But that's really where we're working. Pat, why don't you give the explanation about your background?
So my name is Patrick. I'm one of Deborah's many mini ombudsmans. I have, I guess, a similar journey to Thomas in that, well, firstly, I studied legal studies in high school, which I really enjoyed. I wasn't sure if law was for me going into a law degree, so I actually completed a bachelor's in criminology and philosophy. And following that, I enrolled in a law degree. And I found that it was pretty competitive. One of the things I didn't like was that I found that people would quite often compare themselves to other students, and I didn't really buy into that. I don't think it was helpful for me, but for some people, I think that competitive atmosphere works for them, and it pushes them along the way, makes them work hard. For me, I guess I like to compare myself to who I was 6 months ago. So am I doing better than I was 6 months ago? And I ended up working in the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, writing reports for the tribunal. I did that for about 5 years and found myself in Melbourne and working at the Ombudsman's office. I think one of the things that I love about working for the Ombudsman is our focus on fairness. We in ERT we get a lot of complainants that come to us, and one thing that I'll hear quite often is the complainant, the person that comes to us, feels like they're in a bit of a David and Goliath battle with whatever government agency it may be. And I think, firstly, one of the key things in our role is to reaffirm for people that call us that you have a right to complain. Whatever has taken place, you have a right to ask questions and get answers for something bad that's happened to you. So I certainly try to reaffirm that for people that give us a call.
Okay, I'm the last of the rank. My name's Amanda, and a little bit about my background, and I might take it back to your level. So up until year 11, I was the worst student ever. I was not dedicated, I was not interested at all, and then all of a sudden I decided to focus a little bit more. I'm a little bit not like Deborah. I didn't get in the 90s, so I didn't get into law school, but I got an all right enter to the point where some teachers were like, "Oh, that's so amazing, Amanda, well done." It's like, yes. Okay, you can think, great. So I decided to do an undergraduate degree in a Bachelor of Arts specialising in criminal justice and government administration. And through that, I did an internship at the Ombudsman's office. And I was lucky to stay on board from there. And the work that I got exposed to a lot was about understanding the rules that are in place and what government agencies can decide and make decisions that affect your life. And I really got interested in reading about the law and understanding the law more. So from there, I did a Masters of Law, and I finished that while working at the Ombudsman's office. I've done most of the things at the Ombudsman's office. I've been there for 7 years now, and it's really amazing how every single year I just see a different angle to the work that we do, and it's probably the type of issues that we get to come across that have kept me there and how we're engaging differently with agencies and with members of the public. So I've done a bit of our investigations team, our inquiries team, so really trying to informally resolve things with agencies, and also with Patrick and Thomas in our early resolution team as well. So that's a bit about me. Might throw it out to people. Any questions about anything we've said, anything we've not said?
Yeah, absolutely. No, look, that's a really good and important question. You know, if those who didn't hear it, can the Ombudsman deal with all the complaints that should be coming in? Well, I think the first point is that not a lot of people actually know what the Ombudsman does. So I get about 40,000 complaints a year to the office, and these guys deal with them. Lots of those are about things that we can't do. People complain about their phone bills to us. We send them to there's a telecommunications ombudsman deals with that one. So they perform a terrific social service in pointing people in the right direction. But even if you take 40,000 complaints, I would say that would be a tiny fraction of people's grievances with the bureaucracy. Because people they either don't know where to go, or they can't be bothered, or think nothing's going to happen, or there's no point. So for me, there is an issue around access, around explaining about telling them it's okay to complain, and which comes even before how we engage. So something I'm really keen to do, particularly among the most disadvantaged people in our state, in our society, because they are the least likely people for whom English is a foreign language. People who have have illnesses, disability. People, from really disadvantaged backgrounds, I simply don't know where to go. They're not on the internet. They're not going to be Googling Ombudsman. So, so there's a really important piece of work for me about, letting people know what the Ombudsman is, what we do, getting out there, and it's something that I'm really keen to pursue. So I have asked for funding for that, and actually it's something that I have temporarily, so I'm going to be doing more of it. We're working with community legal centres for now, which is that's a recent. For the office, so that because they're engaging with many people out there, and we're working with them to help those of their clients who we can do something about. So yes, there's a big piece there. The Ombudsman's office, I always will be asking for more. I always want to be able to do more. I'm limited in what I can do by my funding, and it's the one area where I'm not independent. But that's also, I'm hoping, going to be changing soon. So yes, but also I'm not doing too badly, and I'm not going to be, much as I believe that complaining is a good thing, I'm not going to complain too bitterly just yet. Watch this space. So ask me that question in a year's time. Thank you. Yep. Great.
I think it was maybe realising that there was an assumption that teachers thought of me in a particular way, that I wasn't a hard worker, so they were maybe less likely to give me advice about things or whatnot. And I think part of it is also having a little bit of self-reflection of where you're at as well, and kind of realising, you start hearing people talk about, after high school, what are you thinking about doing? And that does get you thinking beyond high school a bit as well. So maybe a little bit is about ego in terms of trying to prove it wrong, but also I think it's really important to try and prove yourself wrong and to challenge those assumptions that you might have about yourself as well. But answer it.
We've got microphones. You want to make it? Yeah. Oh, that'll be right.
Can you all?
Yeah.
Apart from responding to complaints, what other initiatives are you allowed to carry out, of your own doing?
Basically, whatever I like, as long as it's in jurisdiction. That's one of the great power. And I haven't got. I mean, I could spend hours telling about the Ombudsman's powers and all the things we do. One of the significant powers of the office is that I can investigate any aspect of my jurisdiction, whether or not I receive a complaint. So I'm not reliant on complaints. So we could see something in the paper, and say, oh, what's going on there? Let's have a look at it, and I can launch an investigation. So what I'm limited by are my resources. I'm not and my jurisdiction. So as you've heard, all state and local government entities, essentially except the police and the courts, are in jurisdiction. So I could turn over any stone and say, right, let's have a look at that. One is I looked at, for example, was expulsions in schools a year ago. That might be a bit close to home for some of the audience, but it's a really important area. And one of the things we identified there was there was a huge number of what we call soft expulsions, of people that don't actually go through people who are just told don't come back. And what happens to those kids? And that wasn't a result of a complaint. It was something that we just thought was really important. Yeah.
Could each of you just talk about how you came to work at the Ombudsman's office? That was pretty much the question.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned I grew up in New South Wales. So I completed my studies in there and worked in New South Wales for a bit. After travelling, I applied for a position at the New South Wales Ombudsman, fresh out of uni, and I didn't get it. So I think ever since that time, I'd always envisioned the Ombudsman's office to be, the ideal office for me because of its focus on fairness and accountability, values that I really hold dear. And so I didn't get the job at the New South Wales Ombudsman, and waited a few years. I commenced psychology in Melbourne. Melbourne is a lot nicer than Sydney, I think. So I stayed here and applied for the Victorian Ombudsman and was successful. So,
my answer might involve something that either you might know now or you probably will find out, but it's not always what you know, but who you know. I happen to have a friend. yeah. It's also what you know, but partly who you know. I had a friend who was working in the office, so I was in the middle of my degree, my law degree, and I was volunteering at a few community legal centres, but my friend stated that the office needed some more people they were looking to hire, so I just put my application in. So I hadn't planned for a long time, and I think you might find as well that often, as with Deborah, your career kind of takes you in weird paths. Opportunities open up and you decide whether or not you want to grab onto it. But I had never, I didn't spend months preparing to apply to the office. It just came up and I took it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, have you ever reviewed a case? Oh my god, I hate that sound. Have you ever reviewed a case that made you make any changes to your the human charter rights or any rules or regulations you guys had?
Yes, it's not uncommon.
Can you turn that microphone off? I think the reverb.
Okay.
Yep. The button's on the back.
You okay with that? Yes. Okay.
All good.
It's always the technology, isn't it? But anyway, anybody want to do IT? Whatever. Not my field. It's would be with our major investigations, the kind that result in reports tabled in Parliament. Very commonly, the recommendations will be for a change of the law in some way, changes to government policies, changes to procedures, and the acceptance rate for Ombudsman recommendations is between 95 and 100%. So although I can't enforce my recommendations, the change that results in that is significant. So it could be, and really what we ask ourselves, you say, we get to the end of the investigation, what's gone wrong here? What's the problem? And then what needs to happen to fix it? And that could be, it could be an individual outcome like, pays these people some money, or it could be a more systemic outcome like change the law. And any of those is possible and is a potential outcome for an Ombudsman investigation. Thank you. Thank you for your question. So I can, yep. Okay, quick one. Good question. What's the essential area of issues I receive? Am I quoting you correctly? And have they changed over time? I've been in the role for 4 years, so probably ask me at the end of 10, which is the end of my term, whether I've really seen changes. We get the themes are depressingly familiar still, I'm afraid. So we get huge numbers of complaints about local councils, about prisons, about child protection, about housing. And what I'm hoping is that the nature of those will change over time so that we actually see improvements. Probably a little bit too early to tell, but it's the kind of thing that we do look at. And I want to report on, and I want to speak about, actually, towards in the second half of my term. Because what we're trying to do is not just slam, The headline you always see, I don't know whether any of you have actually seen this yourselves, but I don't know anybody actually reads real newspapers anymore, but if you actually read newspapers, they go, Ombudsman slammed, something or other. And yeah, so people say, oh, the Ombudsman, you're a bit of a slammer, but actually what we really want to do, and sometimes what that slamming helps to achieve, is to achieve change, and achieve improvements in public administration. And that's about having things go better so you don't have to complain, So local governments do it better. We've issued a guide for local councils about how to deal with the public better, to get them to deal with complaints better. So that's a classic one that I'm monitoring, because what I hope, if they do this well, that the level of complaints about local councils should begin to go down. So ask me that in a few years. Thank you.